afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here on behalf of all of my colleagues here at the Fast Company Innovation Festival. We appreciate you joining us for this discussion, which is made possible by our partner, Dow. And today we're going to talk about something that affects each and every one of us in this room, and our children, and their children, and so on. And that is the path to a sustainable future. Modern consumers are informed, they're demanding sustainable products, and that is transforming every aspect of our take-make-waste system. And our panelists today are each part of the solution, helping figure out how we manage resources, how we make products, and figure out what we can do with the materials afterward. So welcome to each of our panelists. I'd like to start by learning from each of you a little bit more about your work and your organization's place in this ecosystem. So Haley, let's start with you. Talk a little bit about what you're up to at Dow and how you all look at waste materials as the key to this circular economy. How are different stakeholders all involved in this materials ecosystem?
So Dow is a large material science company. We're about 125 years old, and we're at the very front end of the value chain. So we make materials that ultimately are used in many different applications, like packaging and automotive and infrastructure. And we believe in a world where waste is not waste. We believe in a world where we can start to see circular materials really move throughout the system. And so last year we launched a new sustainability target to commercialize and to transform the waste by commercializing 3 million tons of circular and renewable products because we believe that we want to see those materials be kept in motion.
Wonderful. And Thomas, tell us about New Energy Blue. Your company is building entirely plant-based solutions for materials like plastics. So tell us about that work and how you think about raw materials and waste.
Yeah. My company helped develop a bioconversion technology over the past decade, and we are also developing some of our own projects here in the U.S., starting at Mason City, Iowa. And we're really focused on agricultural waste and corn stover, the stalks of corn, and straws with wheat straws. Sugar bagasse, which is a leftover from the sugar industry. All those waste, all those leftovers can be converted into sustainable solutions around auto fuels, jet fuels, all sorts of biochemistry, plastics. And looking at this right now, plants are the best solar panels in the world, better than what man can produce. And if you absorb that sun every single day, you're growing on those carbons, those atmospheric carbons. We can take those same carbons and produce all the products in which we are used in our daily lives, and that can take a jet across the ocean and so forth. And so that's really where our focus is, replacing the oil and gas refining of today to a biomass sustainable form to be able to produce all these products.
Thank you. And expanding the types of waste we can process also expands the waste entrepreneur circle to include farmers and waste pickers. And Ashish, that brings us to you. So tell us about your work.
Awesome. How many of you picked up a plastic glass today here? Quick show of hands. Awesome. Behind that plastic glass is a little recycle logo. Behind that recycle logo is a mama waste picker in Haiti. There's a mama waste picker in Lusaka, Zambia. Let's just define waste picker for a second here. A waste picker is a person who lives in extreme poverty who picks up the bottle of plastic on the streets of Lusaka. Actually, don't even go to Lusaka, actually. Make it easier for you. At 2 a.m., if anybody's interested, walk with me on Church Street today, and you'll find waste pickers who pick up those bottles and those cups that you will toss away, and they'll make its way back to the recycled economy. Yet they are extremely invisible because they cannot prove their existence in this global circular supply chain. That's a waste picker. Same definition for smallholder farmers. If you drank a cup of coffee that said fair trade, because that smallholder farmer is also invisible. So what we do is ensure that supply chains are not only traceable and transparent, but are equitable to that mama waste picker.
Got it. Yeah, and tell us a little bit more about what you mean by traceability.
So traceability is kind of like all the rage these days, right? But make it real for your own self, right? If I asked you to walk outside this room, but you couldn't prove your education, you couldn't prove your work history, how do you think the world would treat you? And now make yourself a mama waste picker who has been picking up plastic for the last 5 years on the streets here or on the streets of Lusaka, but she can't prove that her plastic shows up at this conference. Her plastic is traceable, but her existence is not. So for me, traceability is the ability to prove that her work is traceable, the material is traceable, because we need both.
And maybe that would be one thing I would love to piggyback off of, because I feel like, over 400 brands have made commitments that they want to use recyclable and renewable materials embedded into their products. So even let's take a controversial item like plastic packaging. So look in your lunch boxes that you have right now, the salad that is kept fresh. You've got two sides of these equations. On one side of the equation, plastics offer some of the lowest carbon footprint over any other materials. They help keep your food fresh. They help keep cars lightweight. They help deliver renewable energy to the grid. And on the other side of the equation, and those are things that we need and that we want. On the other side of the equation are lifestyles of convenience and the disposability of these items that don't make it back into the materials ecosystem is a problem. And that's what we're trying to solve. And that's really where Dow comes into place, is balancing this responsible production and responsible consumption, and why we need the traceability throughout the materials ecosystem. So when I throw out that word often, like materials ecosystem, people are like, what does that even really mean? And a materials ecosystem, if you start to think about it, is where is waste generated? Let's take a household. Waste is generated at a household. You put your waste in a bin. If you're in the developed countries, normally a waste management company will come and pick that up. They'll take it to a recycling facility and it's processed. As Ashish mentioned, in the developing world, they don't have that infrastructure. And so that's really where waste pickers come into place, is because they're a critical part of the circular economy to getting that material back into the system. And then companies like brands or retailers or automotive companies can start to put that recycled or renewable content back into the applications into which it came from. And so really, by looking at plastics from a circularity lens and a systems approach, we're able to find ways to value it differently, to use it. And that's frankly what I'm most excited about, and humbled by sitting and sharing the stage with these two innovators, is that we're redefining the way that waste looks. We're redefining the value of it, we're redefining how we use it, and we're redefining the people behind it, and we're redefining, frankly, what we call it, a system without waste.
Wonderful. And let's talk about some of the tools and technologies behind making this possible. Let's stick with Ashish here to start, because I know that your company actually leverages the blockchain technology that's the underpinning of most cryptocurrencies. So how does that work?
So no cryptocurrency tips here. Wrong panel. So we use blockchain in a very pedestrian way, right? So if you never see me again, think about a very simple example. Going back to that mama waste picker, she does not have a smartphone. Right, that's a critical piece, right? Yet she has been asking for proof of how many bottles she has sold in the last 5 years. On the same side, if you're a smallholder farmer who's been selling coffee that you're drinking as fair trade, she's been asking proof, right? But she doesn't have a smartphone. So the way we look at blockchain, in a very analog way, sounds kind of odd, right? But blockchain, all it does is something very simple, which is gives that mama waste picker an SMS proof of what she sold, when she sold, at what price and what quantity. Why is that important when it comes to traceability? Because that same copy that says, Mama, in Colombia, like the work we're doing with Dow, you sold 40 bottles. She has a copy of that transaction. in an SMS message that cannot be deleted because it's connected to blockchain. And at the same time, Haley can log on to her phone and say, I know this supply chain from waste picker to the processor all the way to the circular packaging, and now she is legitimizing her existence. That's the only value of blockchain.
Wonderful. Thomas, same question for you. I know, what you're doing is so innovative. What kinds of tools, processes, what's been most impactful at New Energy Blue?
Well, I do something a little bit different with my technology and building out biomass refineries. And they're large facilities, about 300 million to build each one. We need thousands of these around the world, processing the nature's waste every year and turning that into energy, but biochemistry. One example, for instance, most of you have tennis shoes on. That tennis shoe actually is made from fossil carbons. We dig those into the ground, and they're here permanently. In a circular production, where we're drawing those atmospheric carbons, as I said with plants before, we produce jet fuel. Jet fuel combusts that fuel that's made from that plant. And the next season, that plant absorbs that amount of carbons back in. So it's a circular pattern in which we can start creating away from the fossil industry. And the other part of that is we can sequester more of those carbons, those atmospheric carbons. So we can take them out of the air and we can start producing your tennis shoes. So instead of walking on fossil carbons, now you're walking on atmospheric carbons. And so they're sequestered in there. We can even, with our biomass refinery, we take the cellulosic walls of the plant, not just the sugars, the cellulosic walls. That's the best binder in the world. And we can actually pave our roads, replacing oil bitumen in our road systems. We're doing that already in Europe. We have about 7 years of testing there. And we plan to do that here in the U.S. and replacing oil and replacing asphalt with your shingles and your road surfacing. All of that can be replaced by atmospheric carbons.
And do you think that you talk about so many different, waste streams? I think at least from a consumer perspective, we think about what we recycle in our blue bins, but you've talked a lot about agricultural waste. Do you think that sometimes some waste streams are sometimes not talked about enough in this conversation?
Well, it's odd because we produce food to feed the world. We can also produce our own energy. And you look at the cornfields across the U.S., and we have a lot of it. We produce a lot of corn, a lot of number 2 yellow corn for livestock, and also your cornflakes every morning. And so you start looking at that, and we continue to have a greater population of corn within these fields. We need to take some of that biomass off the field. Some of that biomass, it's not waste. You let some of that on the field because you need that organic content. But because of the field populations nowadays, we can take that off and we can start producing our energy, your tennis shoes, your Ziploc bags, everything else that you use every single day. And so the farmer is starting to understand that. They're working with us across the country here to be able to create a new income for them on these fields where they can feed the world and also to be able to feed the world's energy as well. So.
Haley, I want to bring the innovation question to you as well. Can you talk about some of the innovations, tools? What's been most impactful at Dow in your work?
Yeah, disruption is everywhere. And I think two of the things that I'm most excited about are new recycling technologies that I see actually growing. There's a new technology called advanced recycling or molecular recycling, and this actually takes materials back to its original building blocks. And we're able to convert those into liquids or gases that we then put into our manufacturing facility as we call that feedstocks, that we put in as a feedstock, and we can use that product to make our materials over and over and over again.
Kelly, could you give us an example of what that looks like, breaking something down to kind of the original molecular level?
Yeah, I mean, there are different technologies called pyrolysis or gasification that take the plastic trash and convert that back to a molecular structure that we can then use as an input for our facilities. And so we can make future plastics with that trash. So I think that's a really exciting part. We can take products like food packaging and medical packaging, things that might not have been able to be mechanically recycled today, and able to expand that for more circularity in these materials for the future.
If I can just jump in quickly here, right? Haley talked about disruption. I'll give you one more data point to think about. 500 million. Do your own homework. There's about 500 million people in the world who live in extreme poverty today, right? And these 500 million people are a mix of your smallholder farmers who grew your coffee this morning and picked up your plastic. So you want to couple disruption, technology disruption, but you also want to disrupt this base of the pyramid that has been living in extreme poverty, 500 million of them, but yet made it to your bag of coffee today, right? So you got to look at that angle too. So and we're doing that with Dow.
And to be able to, to be able to meet our targets of commercializing 3 million tons and transforming that waste, we need to unlock a lot more waste. And that's where we're looking at really unconventional places to find this waste. And that's where Thomas comes in, of looking at agricultural waste and waste within farms to utilize that. So the material is there, and all of the energy and resources that it actually took to make the material, we want to keep that in motion. So we have to unlock waste from landfills. We have to unlock waste from incineration. We need to unlock waste from food waste and agricultural waste, so that all of this is not waste anymore.
Well, it's a global problem. I mean, 8 billion people out there should be paying attention to climate change and getting to a circular economy. And that's really important. I mean, we can build these biomass refineries globally wherever there's waste, and there's waste all over this planet. We need to be able to utilize that waste to be able to provide our energy and to provide all our products. That plastic cup that you picked up should be starting on plant-based and sequestered those carbons within that cup and recycling that cup forever. That's how we're going to be able to take those carbons out of the atmosphere, start reducing them, and start changing even on different types of eco-climates throughout the world where we're doing it right.
Great. So, we talked about solutions, talked about some of the goals, and maybe a few of the challenges. But, I want to dig into what you all, from your unique corners of this space, what are some of the barriers that either you're facing or that you see organizations facing as they try to be part of the solution? Thomas, we'll stick with you.
Yeah. Well, there's all sorts of renewable fuels policies out there globally. And there's very little based on chemistry. And so there's not enough, in the U.S., there's no policy at all focused on bio-based chemistry and promoting that. And sure, you have ethanol, for instance, that offsets some of the carbons that you burn in your automobile. But we need that in chemistry so that if you're going to eventually replace the oil and gas refining with a biomass refinery, you need to be able to have driving policy that promotes that, and the U.S. continues to fail to deliver upon that.
Thank you. Ashish, same question for you.
So the barriers, right, or the challenges. I think the biggest barrier, fortunately, unfortunately, depending how you look at it, is brands do not take the time to go all the way to the last mile. I'm being very honest here, right? When Haley and I talked first, she said, I want to know the waste picker. You don't find a lot of people who will say that. So I think that's one of the big barriers, right? It's people kind of sit and do sustainability on a Zoom call, and they'll go up to their aggregator. And I think that's the number one barrier. It's not technology, right? We operate in 58 countries, and 90% of the transactions are on an SMS phone. So it's not blockchain, it's not tech, right? It's the ability to peel your supply chain layers till you get to the landfill, or peel it till you get to the farmer, because the barrier is not the waste picker's adoption. The barrier is not the smallholder farmer's adoption. The barrier is our perception that I can't go that far. You can.
Yeah, from my side, two barriers that are really linked are policy and infrastructure. To be able to get these materials back in motion, you've got to be able to get access to those materials. And the industry right now has invested over $9 billion into the recycling space. And that is without a lot of regulatory certainty. And so I think policy, and one of the ways that policy can help build more infrastructure are through policy drivers like extended producer responsibility, where a fee is captured and then ultimately poured back into the infrastructure to be able to expand that infrastructure in different places. And so those two are really linked, and we as an industry need regulatory certainty to be able to expand and accelerate the circular economy at scale.
If I can add one more barrier, right? It's people don't ask the question, show me, or show me the evidence, right? Ask the question, right? That's one of the biggest way to break the barrier. If somebody says this is 100% recycled or 100% fair trade, how many of you actually ask the question, show me, prove to me?
Wonderful. Would you like to see, more clarity on packaging, more information about the journey? What would be the ideal for you?
For me, the ideal is that if you said we are picking up ocean plastic in Haiti, correct? That showed up in a shoe. Then I want to know if those mamas, again, nothing against dads, right? Women are smarter than men. If you disagree, leave. Okay, good, thank you. But ask the simple question, show me the income increase of these women waste pickers over the last 5 years, because I'm paying premium at a grocery store here for sustainable products. It's a valid question.
Well, it all needs to be traceable. I mean, even with what we're doing here, from soil to consumer product off the shelf. Consumers are really driving this right now. Governments aren't driving it. They aren't doing a very good job at it. And all of these ideas are consumer driven. Consumer is demanding it. So therefore, brands are starting to demand it. And they're demanding it from companies like Dow to be able to produce a bio-based solution to this. And that needs to be traceable so the consumer can make a choice. Even if you're going on an air ride across the ocean, you should know how much fossil fuel you're burning or how much sustainable biofuel you're burning. And so those are the type of smart decisions that we need to make. And so it's just not on that consumer shelf. It's how you travel every single day. It's a cup that you pick up and that you're aware of the source of that feedstock. So.
And briefly, I would love to hear from each of you, looking at the next 10 to 20 years, what do you think are going to be the biggest drivers here? Is it going to be policy? Is it going to be consumers? Haley, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mentioned policy a little bit. Right now, the UN is negotiating a global plastic pollution treaty, and they have the third round of negotiations starting in Kenya in November. So I think this is going to be one of the drivers for a holistic policy that, if done well, can really help finance and build the system further. A few other things that I'm really excited about that I see over the next 10 to 20 years a really full transparency within that system. So we talk about the materials ecosystem like a jigsaw puzzle. At one individual piece may not make sense, but when you put them all together, it makes a lot more sense of actually how it flows. And we talked a little bit about that. And so that's really where I see the space of innovation happening, is between the pieces within the system. And there's a new technology out there, which in North America, for those from North America, it's called Recycle Check. And it's from an organization, a nonprofit called the Recycling Partnership. And you're actually able to scan your package and see if it is recyclable in the community in which you live. And I think that's the next...
different towns have different rules about, some of them you have to throw that in the trash, some of them you can recycle, some of them you have to bring it to a recycling center, and knowing the general policy doesn't help if that's not the situation in my town?
Yeah, there's over 9,000 recycling systems within the U.S., and no wonder that consumers are really confused because it varies by infrastructure and by town. So if you're able to scan your package and say, I know that this is recyclable in my town, and actually then when infrastructure is built within my town and expanded upon, now I can actually put it in the bin and I'm not wish cycling. Those are some of the transparency and traceabilities and building trust back into the system that I think ultimately is needed.
Great. Thomas, same question for you. You know, looking at the next decade or two, you talked a lot about policy. What do you think are going to be the biggest drivers?
Well, I mentioned waste material or the feedstock that's laying in the fields during the harvest, or after each harvest, all around the world. That's huge. But also in the future, 10, 20 years from now, we'll be growing our own energy. We have a lot of growing arid regions in this country. Even in Iowa, where I'm working right now on the project, every single year there's more arid land that used to be growing crops. You have that in the state of New York. State of New York used to be one of the biggest food producers in the world, and now it's not. And we have wastelands up here. And so you start looking at that, we can grow energy grasses. For instance, miscanthus grass grows 12 feet into the soil on the root systems.
Wow.
You can change 50% within the water retention. Now all of a sudden you start looking at states like California and Hawaii who don't have those grasses anymore, don't have those natural grasses that keep that water table in there and keep the soil replenished every single year. We can start doing that, and we can be growing our energy, harvesting our energy, and changing our chemistry with these type of ideas. And that's really where I see the future. We need a bio-based plan to be able to get there, and we can restore southern regions that are now drought-stricken into fertile soils again, and by the energy that we need.
And Ashish, we'll give you the last word. What are the biggest drivers in your corner of the world?
I think the biggest drivers are going to be evidence-based circularity and data rights for waste pickers.
Yeah, what do you mean by data rights for waste pickers?
Look, going back to the definition of the waste picker, right? A waste picker who cannot prove his or her existence will never be visible, right? If they can own their data, which they do through technology like blockchain, they can prove they exist, right? And that's where we're headed, and we should. It's only fair.
I think that's a great place to end it. That is the time we have for today. Thanks so much to our panelists for talking about this.